When we went on vacation with my husband's family, I was asked to sit at a separate table. No one spoke to me for the entire trip at meals. I was just there, silent, ignored. When I asked my husband about it, he shrugged and said, "It's just their way." I smiled politely, holding back my emotions, and said, "Perfect." But that next morning, I made up my mind. I was going to do things my way. And when they found out what I'd done, they panicked. Looking back, the signs had always been there. There were little comments, subtle but sharp, cold looks passed my way like I was out of place. Even in my own marriage, I was always an afterthought. But I ignored it. I adored my husband, Mark. I kept telling myself, if I'm patient, if I keep trying, they'll come around. Things would change, but they didn't. We were on vacation in Hilton Head, South Carolina. It was supposed to be a relaxing escape, a chance to breathe, reconnect, enjoy some sun and ocean air. And when we pulled into the resort, it looked like a dream. The kind you see in glossy travel magazines. White sand, tall palms, the soothing sound of waves crashing in the distance. I felt hopeful, excited even. Maybe this trip will be different, I thought. Maybe Richard and Susan, my in-laws, would finally warm up to me. Maybe we'd sit together, laugh together, bond as a family. That first night proved just how wrong I was. We went to a lovely restaurant for dinner. The waiter led us to a long table, set beautifully, just right for our group. I moved to sit beside Mark. But before I could pull out my chair, Richard suddenly raised his voice. "Oh, there must be a mistake." He gestured toward me. "She needs her own table." I blinked, confused, thinking I'd misheard. "Excuse me?" I asked. Susan didn't even look up from her menu. "It's just what we do." I looked at Mark, hoping for him to step in, to say, "She's my wife," to say, "This isn't okay." But he just sighed, shrugged. "It's just their way," he muttered. So I sat alone, at my own table, on my first night of vacation, with my husband and his family chatting and laughing just a few feet away. I should have walked out right then, but I didn't. I stayed, told myself it was probably some strange, one-time tradition, something they did just that night. I was wrong. The next morning, I got up early, hopeful again. I headed to the hotel restaurant, thinking maybe today would be different. Maybe they'd be waiting for me. I texted Mark. No reply. I wandered around the resort for nearly half an hour, searching. And finally, I found them, already seated, already eating, laughing, mid-meal, as if I didn't exist. I stood there, stunned. "I didn't know you were coming down," I said quietly. Richard barely looked up. "We thought you'd figure it out." Susan, sipping her coffee, added, "It's just what we do." I looked at Mark. The rest of the trip fell into a pattern, one I was all too familiar with. Every meal, I sat alone. Every outing, they somehow forgot to mention to me. They went on a private boat tour. I only found out because I saw their smiling faces on Instagram. They attended a fancy wine tasting. I found out when I passed them in the lobby, all dressed up and ready to go without me. Later, I texted Mark, tried to keep my voice calm. He sighed, again, like it was no big deal. As if I was the one being difficult. "It's just their way," he repeated. And that was always his only answer. By the end of the 4th day, I was done. I stopped asking where they were going, stopped trying to be included. They liked it better when I was invisible anyway. But what they didn't know was, I had a plan of my own. That very night, while they went out drinking and celebrating their perfect little family vacation, I stayed back in the hotel room, and I got to work. Because I wasn't just sitting at a separate table anymore. I was about to remove myself completely, and they were about to feel it. I opened my email and pulled up all the reservation confirmations. Because, guess what? Every single thing was in my name. The hotel, the rental car, the dinners, the spa day Susan had been looking forward to for weeks. All of it. I had paid for everything. So I started canceling, one by one, carefully, quietly. Every reservation was gone. Their rooms? Canceled. Rental car? Gone. Their dinner at the waterfront grill? Wiped clean. Even Susan's luxurious spa appointment? I called the spa and gently let them know she would not be attending. Then I packed my bags, grabbed the rental car, and left. While they were clinking glasses and making toasts, I was already on the highway heading to Charleston. The first had booked myself a beautiful suite, ordered room service, sat on the balcony, finally calm, watching the ocean. Peaceful. While back at the resort, chaos was about to unfold. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you had to stand up for yourself, even if it meant going against family expectations? How did you handle it? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your story. I woke up in Charleston the next morning, feeling strangely refreshed. It was the first time in days that I felt truly at peace. The ocean breeze flowed through the window of my hotel room, and I stretched out on the plush lounge chair, sipping my coffee and gazing at the waves rolling in. But as I relaxed, my phone began to vibrate. I looked at the screen. It was Mark. I let it ring. Then, Susan. Mark again. Richard. I switched my phone on, feeling a little uneasy, but knowing what was coming. They were silent for a few moments, and then it hit me. They realized. Richard's groggy voice came through first. "Where are you?" I had imagined the exact moment when it dawned on them, the realization that everything had been taken from them. I could almost hear Richard dragging himself out of bed, grumbling and muttering under his breath as I waited for the hotel manager to approach. "Excuse me, but it seems there's an issue with your reservation," the manager said politely. I smiled, sitting up straighter. It was the first time in a long time I felt in control. Meanwhile, across town, Susan, who had been stretching in bed, hurried to grab her phone, only to find the same string of cancellation emails I had seen. Her face paled as she read them. Mark was still asleep, his mother's voice drifting in the background as she grew more and more frustrated. Richard sounded completely confused, and I could almost hear the panic start to set in. I smiled to myself as I sipped my coffee, enjoying the peace of knowing they were beginning to feel the consequences of their actions. I wasn't just some invisible person to be overlooked, and they were starting to see that. The phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Mark. "Where are you? What's going on?" he wrote, his message coming through in quick succession. I paused before responding. "I'm fine. I'm in Charleston. I left Hilton Head. I'm not missing, and I'm not coming back." I let out a deep breath. It felt good to say it. A few seconds later, the phone rang again. I picked up, knowing what I was about to hear. "You need to fix this." Mark's voice was tight with frustration. I could almost picture him pacing, trying to figure out how he had gotten here, how his perfect little vacation with his family had unraveled. "No, Mark," I replied calmly. "I don't need to fix anything. This isn't about tradition. This is about control. You've let them treat me this way for years, and I won't let you do it anymore." There was silence on the other end of the line, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was standing up for myself, not just silently enduring the pain. "Don't you think this is just a little too much?" Mark said after a long pause, his voice softer now. "No, Mark. This is exactly what I needed to do," I said firmly. There was a brief silence. Then I heard a sigh, and Mark's voice faltered. "I just don't get you sometimes." "Well, that's not my problem anymore," I answered, hanging up the phone without a second thought. The next few hours were spent in a calm blur. As I sat in my suite in Charleston, the quiet finally felt like a relief. I was no longer tangled up in their games, their drama. I could breathe again. I opened up my email once more, just to make sure everything I'd planned was in place. The reservations were gone. Their trip had been completely derailed. In the meantime, they were scrambling. They had nowhere to stay. No rental car, no dinner plans. They were stuck in their little world of expectations, and I had broken free. And they didn't even know what to do with themselves. At that moment, I felt more in control of my life than I had in years. A few hours later, I received another text from Susan. It was full of anger. "I can't believe you would humiliate us like this," she wrote. I almost laughed at how she was still trying to make me feel guilty. I ignored it, not even giving it a second thought. But then another message came through. "You made Mark involve the police. Do you realize what this looks like?" she asked. I had made Mark involve the police? I rolled my eyes. The nerve. But I didn't want to waste any more energy on it. They were trying to guilt-trip me into feeling sorry for them, but I had finally reached a point where I couldn't care less. Then the messages kept coming, one after another, all of them trying to guilt me into coming back, trying to get me to undo what I had done. They were trying to manipulate me into returning to their toxic little world. "You need to come back. Fix this," Susan wrote. "If you don't, Mark will make things difficult for you." I sat back in my chair, rereading the message, my heart racing. This wasn't just about me being difficult. This was about them trying to break me. They wanted me to be silent again, to be invisible again. But I was done. Done with their games. Done with being the afterthought. Done with Mark letting them control me. I stared at the phone for a moment, letting the weight of their words settle in. But instead of feeling afraid, I felt empowered. I knew what I had to do next. I could feel the shift now. The change was real. It wasn't just that they were cold or dismissive anymore. This had become a battle, and I wasn't going to roll over and lose. Have you ever had to stand up to family or loved ones to reclaim your own peace? What was that experience like for you? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about it. The following morning, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't experienced in years. I was free from their control, free from the constant need to please them, and I was finally ready to take the next step. But I knew there was one more thing I had to do. I wasn't going to let them think they could just walk over me. I had to confront them. So, I booked a hotel conference room in Charleston. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. I knew they'd be furious. And I knew Mark would try to fix everything in his own way, but I had no intention of backing down. I invited everyone: Mark, his parents, and Sarah. If they wanted a war, I was going to deliver it right to their doorstep. That morning, I sat in the conference room, waiting. The table was long, set with nothing but bottles of water and the heavy silence of anticipation. I could hear the sounds of the hotel lobby beyond the door, the footsteps, the murmurs, but I stayed calm. Soon enough, the door swung open. Mark stormed in first, his jaw clenched so tightly I was sure it was going to snap. His parents followed, and Susan's heels clicked sharply on the floor. Richard's face was already flushed with anger. Sarah came in last, looking hesitant, her arms crossed. She gave me a slight nod, and I wasn't sure if she was there as a witness, a mediator, or if she just wanted to watch the drama unfold. Either way, I was ready. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a strange calm settle over me. It was like I had finally taken control of the situation, and I wasn't about to let it slip. "Well, I'm glad you could all make it," I said, looking each of them in the eye. Mark's voice was sharp as he cut through the silence. "What the hell is this?" His tone was full of anger, frustration, and confusion all rolled into one. I smiled slowly. "You've been deliberate in your conversation, Richard. You're eager to talk, so let's talk." Richard scoffed, his arms folded across his chest. "You think this is funny?" "No," I replied calmly. "I think it's pathetic. I think you people play sick little games with the women in your family, and you've finally chosen the wrong one to mess with. Susan's eyes narrowed at me. She looked like she was about to speak, but I wasn't finished. Oh, I abandoned you? I laughed. That's rich. Coming from those who spent an entire vacation pretending I didn't exist. Mark exhaled sharply, gripping the back of a chair. He looked at me like I was the one who had gone too far. You're blowing this out of proportion. I slammed my hands against the table, the sound echoing in the room. No, Mark, when I'm your wife, I said, my voice cold and sharp, and you let them treat me like nothing. I pointed my finger at him, but nothing happened. He didn't defend me. He didn't speak up. He just stood there, looking unsure. Mark knew. He knew exactly what had been happening. He knew what they were doing, and yet he allowed it. He allowed me to be treated like this. Susan spoke quickly, her voice high-pitched. We were just following tradition. I shook my head. It's not tradition. It's control. And you failed. Every woman who comes into this family, every single one, has been treated the same way. Mark shook his head, his face reddening with frustration. You're overreacting. I grabbed my phone from the table and pulled up the messages from Lauren. I threw it in front of Mark. Read it, I said. Read it slowly. He hesitated, picking up the phone with shaky hands. As he read the messages, I could see his face tighten with each word. His eyes were wide with realization, and when he was done, he threw the phone down like it had burned him. This isn't proof, Mark said, his voice shaky. Richard crossed his arms. You're digging up old stories that have nothing to do with us. I turned toward Susan. Is that right? Because last night, I received a message threatening me. Mark warned me that if I didn't come back, things would get difficult. Is that correct? Susan snapped her mouth shut. Sarah, who had been silent up until now, let out a low whistle. Wow. Mark turned to face his mother, his eyes narrowing. You did exactly what Susan wanted you to do. Susan stiffened, and I could see the guilt flash in Mark's eyes as he tried to defend his mother. But I knew the damage was done. Mark's jaw twitched, and I could see the tiny crack in his loyalty to his parents. He had been carefully crafted by them, molded to believe that he had to choose them over me. But now that he saw the truth, he was unsure. He had already made his choice. He hadn't stood up for me. He never did. For the first time, I could see it in his eyes. He was unsure of where his loyalties lay. I've been through this for years, Mark said, his voice shaking with anger. You've been playing this game for years. I stared at him, waiting for him to finish. I wasn't going to let him off the hook this time. Richard shifted uncomfortably, and Susan gave him an uneasy look. The damage had been done. The truth was out in the open. Mark turned back to me for the first time, actually seeming unsure of himself. For the first time, I saw a crack in the armor he had built around his family. I had won. I stared at him, waiting to see if he would finally say something meaningful. But instead, he ran his fingers through his hair and muttered, I can fix this. I leaned back in my chair, my stomach sinking. That's your answer? You're going to fix it? You've been fixing things for your family, Mark, not for me. I stood up, adjusting my bag, and made my way toward the door. Mark's voice, desperate, echoed behind me. Wait, where are you going? I stopped, turned around, and stared at him one last time. I'm leaving. Susan scoffed. You can't just leave your marriage. I met her gaze. My expression was unreadable. Watch me. Then I walked out the door, leaving behind everything I had tried so hard to make work. Have you ever reached a point where you had to choose your own well, being over keeping the peace for others? How did it feel? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your experiences. It took me 6 months to finalize the divorce. 6 long months of waiting, filing paperwork, and sorting through emotions I never knew I had. In that time, Mark tried everything. He begged, he blamed, he even accused me of overreacting. He thought that by saying those things, I would eventually cave and come back. But I never did. I knew what I had to do, and that decision was final. During that time, I stayed in touch with Sarah. She kept me updated on everything that happened after I left. Apparently, Mark confronted his parents, and it wasn't pretty. Richard called him weak, and Susan cried, claiming I had brainwashed him. But none of that mattered to me. I had already made my choice, and nothing was going to change my mind. Mark finally saw his parents for who they truly were, and it was too late. He had missed his chance to choose me over them, and I had already walked away. I moved back to Charleston and found a new apartment. I reconnected with old friends, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was living for myself. I began the long process of rebuilding my life, piece by piece, taking everything one day at a time. I had no idea what my future would look like, but I knew it would be on my own terms. Months passed. I focused on myself, my health, my friendships, my career, and slowly, I began to heal. I found new strength in myself that I hadn't realized was there before. But I also knew that healing would take time. I wasn't going to rush it. Then, one night, about a year later, I received a text from an unknown number. My heart raced as I looked at the screen. I recognized the number immediately. It was Mark. He had sent me a message. I see it now, and I am sorry, the message read. I should have understood earlier, but I didn't. I was blind to how much I hurt you. I truly regret everything. I stared at the message for a while, my mind racing. After everything that had happened, all the pain and heartbreak, I wasn't sure how to feel. Part of me wanted to throw my phone away and never look back. But another part of me that had spent so much time trying to fix things, wondered if it was possible to find peace and closure. So I sat there and stared at the screen, letting it all sink in. I hadn't expected an apology, but here it was, laid out in front of me. Mark was sorry. For the first time, he admitted he had been wrong. For the first time, he saw the truth. I deleted the message. It wasn't a malicious decision. It wasn't an angry one either. I just knew that it was time to let go. The past had already shaped me into who I was today, and I had no interest in holding on to anything that didn't serve me. My freedom wasn't about revenge or bitterness. It was about moving forward with peace in my heart. That night, I sat on my balcony, the ocean stretching out in front of me. The sound of the waves, the cool breeze, and the silence all felt so calming. For the first time in years, I felt like I was finally home, not just physically, but emotionally. I was free. There was no more guilt, no more manipulation, no more trying to please others at the expense of my own well-being. I had learned a powerful lesson about standing up for myself, about drawing boundaries, and about choosing myself when everyone else wanted me to be something I wasn't. I had let go of the people who had held me back, and now I was free to become the woman I had always wanted to be. A few days later, I received a call from Sarah. She told me that Mark had confronted his parents after I left, and the confrontation had not gone well. They had tried to guilt him into choosing them over me, but Mark finally realized what he had been blind to for so long. He had tried to make things right with them, but it was too late. The damage had been done. His parents never apologized, and the relationship with them was fractured beyond repair. I didn't feel sorry for him. It wasn't about Mark anymore. It was about me. I had chosen my own happiness, and that choice was empowering. It had taken years for me to realize that I didn't have to sacrifice my own happiness for anyone else. I could still love people and let them go if they didn't respect my boundaries. I could stand up for myself and refuse to be treated as less than, and I would never go back to that place again. What is the most important lesson you've learned about standing up for yourself in difficult situations? Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic relationship to find peace? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story could inspire others who might be going through something similar. And with that, the story comes to an end. The key message of this story is the power of reclaiming one's sense of self-worth and the importance of standing up for our own happiness, even when it means confronting painful truths. The protagonist's journey is one of self-liberation, realizing that staying silent, tolerating mistreatment, or sacrificing personal peace for the sake of family or relationships is not a path to fulfillment. Instead, it's about recognizing when we're being taken for granted, setting boundaries, and making tough decisions that honor our well-being. As we age, it becomes even more crucial to prioritize our own needs and values. Life is too short to remain in toxic environments or relationships that hold us back from living authentically. Whether it's standing up to family, asserting your boundaries in a marriage, or letting go of unhealthy patterns, the strength to choose yourself is a lesson worth learning at any age. This story encourages us to trust our instincts and take bold steps when necessary. It's never too late to reclaim control over our lives and create the peace and happiness we deserve. What moment in your life taught you the importance of setting boundaries? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about the power of self-respect.